Hello, it's Will Lowen, and I have a question to start with. What is the difference between an apology and a confession? I suspect that if we were going to talk at length about the difference between these two things, an apology and a confession, we might talk about the religious and spiritual implications behind confession, and we might talk about the importance within relationships for the need to apologize and to say sorry. If I were to oversimplify, as pastors often do, I might say that both an apology and a confession include a recognition of wrongdoing. But in a confession, there's also an understanding that there was an awareness of the wrong even before the act was committed, which makes the act worse. Within an apology, there seems to be an understanding that there's an awareness of the consequence in terms of harm done of the act, and sometimes the harm that was done is what makes the act wrong rather than having broken some kind of rule. Now, as a pastor and sometimes counselor, I really encourage people to apologize. Now, you have to be in a mental and emotional state before you're ready to apologize, and it has to come from a place of sincerity. But the power of an apology to make things right in a relationship really cannot be measured. However, as a pastor and then religious educator, I also have to admit that there really isn't a biblical model for saying sorry. There are a lot of stories of confession to God, confession to priests, but there aren't really any examples of saying sorry. There certainly aren't any commandments that we should apologize to each other. Really only the ongoing commandment that we need to confess our sins to God. And so this leaves us at a bit of a conundrum, because we really like to apologize. We certainly like to enjoy the benefits of the healed relationships that we get from apologizing. And yet we don't really have a biblical model. Within the church, we've talked a little bit lately about the relationship between the Catholics and the Lutherans and the role that an apology plays in this. Recently, the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church have apologized to the Mennonites because of the way that they were treated 500 years ago and moving forward. At World Conference, there was a conversation among some people about whether or not we as Mennonites should participate in some kind of apology for the wrong that was done in Munster, since in some ways we inherit the spiritual legacy of that. But going back to our interpersonal apologies, our understanding of what constitutes a sufficient apology probably depends on whether we are the ones giving the apology or whether we are waiting to receive an apology. Apologies have to go beyond acknowledging wrongdoing and acknowledging harm. But here's the million-dollar question. What should an apology look like? My wife and I certainly have disagreed about the answer to this question, sometimes in the midst of an apology. But we never came to a consensus, and I suspect that we're not the only ones. And so, does an apology need to have simply an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, or does it need to go beyond that in terms of what the next steps might be? But I would really like for this notion of apologizing to become part of the broader conversation around structural and systemic sin, and how do we move beyond recognizing simply that it has happened and towards taking steps towards improving the relationship. I invite your thoughts on this topic, and thanks for listening.